Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield. I'm on vacation already, I think, apparently in my brain. I'm your host of the weekly livestock market update, Meghan Grebner, with us as always to talk all things markets, University of Missouri, Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
I think I'm in overdrive. I'm not sure what is going on with me today, so I apologize. All right, we're going to talk a little retail prices. We're going to talk some consumer sentiment. I think we're going to talk a little bit about bacon today. But to kick things off, let's recap what happened this week in the markets.
Yeah, on the cattle side this week, Megan, live fed cattle were $1.45 higher this week. Those feeder cattle markets were basically steady on the week. Feeder calves were a little bit higher on the week, but feeder cattle steady. On the future side, April live cattle futures were up 85 cents, and those March feeder cattle closed higher this week, up 3.95. We slid on corn again this week. March corn futures down 14 cents on the week. On the beef side, choice box beef was really unchanged this week. That puts them $18.75 above the same period a year ago. On the hog side, cash barrels and gilts up $1.50 this week, and the April lean hog futures contract was up $4. We also gained $2.40 on the pork cutout value. That was strength in everything but bellies this week, which were basically unchanged.
It's really nice to have a conversation for once about some stronger hog prices in general. What are some of the things that are happening that are coming in to support this little bit of a push higher in hog prices?
Yeah, so I think we're maybe getting a little bit of demand help here. When you look at some of the current export information that's out there, it's suggesting to me we're getting some pretty strong lift in some of that trade. So perhaps that's been helpful in driving us higher this week.
And I don't think we can talk about demand without talking about Mexico, specifically on the pork side of things. They really have been showing up big in terms of what's happening and who's buying what.
For sure. When you look at that ham primal, up more than $5 this week, it just is a testament to how good Mexico has been for us, and Central America generally, I think, has been positive as well.
All right, Scott, let's talk a little slaughter numbers as we take a look at both cattle and hogs. I've noticed we're pulling back a little bit on the hog side of things.
Yeah, that's true. Hogs this week for the week ending cattle for the week ending February 17th. We'll get the right one out here. 608,000 head of cattle. That's actually a little bit below a week ago. I think we saw Packers trying to slow things just a little, so down 14,000 head relative to a week ago. That's also 17,000 head less than where we were a year ago. On the hog side, a run of 2.559 million head of hogs. That's also lower, down 63,000 head from where we were last week, but up 69,000 relative to the same period a year ago.
Retail prices, as we take a look at those, Scott, let's talk a little bit choice beef retail price first, and how are things shaping up? How did things shape up for January?
Yeah, so we got higher overall choice retail beef price. $8.08 is where we were at in January of 2024. That was up nearly 7 cents a pound from where we were in December. However, when you look back to a year ago, it's nearly 51 cents higher than it was in January of 2023. So strength certainly relative to year ago levels. And I always like to still come back and remind us, in January of 2020, we're now 33% above that January 2020 level with what we did this month. When you look at the individual pieces, ground beef was actually 18 cents lower in January relative to December. But across the board, all stronger prices for those different cuts relative to a year ago.
Let's talk pork and how the retail price of pork shaped up last month.
Yeah, so January's level of 479. We've been pretty flat in terms of the retail pork price. That was actually 3 cents lower than where we were in December, but just down 0.6%. When you look at it relative to a year ago, uh, unchanged, no change in percentage terms. I'll say one of the differences when you look longer term, so the pork retail price up 25% relative to January of 20, some of the lowest when you look at the different meats that we could talk about. Now, to your favorite sliced bacon, of course, it's a 661 reported by BLS for January. That's 16 cents less than we saw in December, down 2.4%, and roughly the same percentage decline relative to a year ago. We were down 2.8% relative to a year ago on sliced bacon. We saw hams 3.5 cents higher month over month, and boneless pork chops down a little more than 3 cents relative to the month ago level.
When we take a look at retail prices like this and we show pork, for example, pulling back a little bit, and even that slight uptick for January in beef, how is demand holding up, and what's going on in terms of what consumers are thinking about prices at the store?
So I would say demand, although maybe slightly weaker as we've gone through 2023 here in early 24, and I say slightly weaker, I'm going to say that relative to 2021 and 2022, which I now come back and say were phenomenal demand years. But we're stacking up fairly well. I will say with what's not a lot of growth in pork production, perhaps we would like to see better pork retail prices than we're seeing right now. But I'd say demand is holding with us as best we can. And let's remember just how steep that increase was back in 21, 22. And all we've really done in pork is just flatten it. It hasn't come down a lot. But if we want higher hog prices, I think we got to get higher retail prices as well.
Consumer sentiment out this week, and another slight improvement, but man, when we talk about those year-over-year levels, it's gotta maybe somebody's got to have a little pep in their step when they look at how they're stacking up year over year.
Yeah, for sure. That overall index up 0.8% in February relative to where we started 2024. That's driven a little bit in terms of expectations. Expectations were up 1.7% month over month, while the current economic conditions were down 0.5%. Now, as you point out, year over year is where we've been seeing the growth. So up 19% in that overall index relative to where we were a year ago. And if you went back even a little further to mid 22, when we were really seeing the index at some of its lowest levels, it's seen some very substantial growth over the period, which is all good news for the demand side. Perhaps inflation that folks think is in a little better check is part of what's been responsible for this bigger increase relative to year ago levels.
Does the wage increase that we've seen to kind of help provide a little support to consumer sentiment as well, if we're talking about jobs and looking at those statistics?
It certainly helps when you think about just overall inflation. At least getting more wages has been part of the offset to what's been, higher inflation. Now, if you look at overall consumer spending in January, I think we got that data out this week, and it was actually showing consumer slowing spending. So big spending in December. Folks being a little bit more careful in January. It's probably not unexpected that it slows, but hopefully not a trend that consumers are going to pull back on spending, because I think that could be something that's not quite as positive for us on the meat consumption side of the equation.
That'll do it for us this week as we look ahead to next week, a big week of reports.
Yeah, that's right. We get the trifecta of livestock slaughter, cattle on feed, and cold storage.
What are some things you're looking for in that first, especially cattle on feed report that comes out after the cattle inventory numbers?
Yes, that to me is the big one. What are we going to do with placements? Are we going to continue to see the slide down that we saw in December continue, which is my expectation, and maybe even a larger decline in placements than we would have seen, percentage decline than we saw in the December numbers. That to me is continuing to be what's going to set the stage as we think about beef production in the second half of 2024.
Well, you and Brent will have plenty to talk about next Friday.
I'm sure Brent and I can cover these reports and have a good time doing it.
I will hear from it and I will watch you from across the pond.
Enjoy yourself across the pond.
Thank you. It's always great to see you.
Take care, Megan.
So our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning. Go to brownfieldagnews.com. You can also submit questions and comments. And for a rundown of what happens every day in the commodity markets, make sure to check out John Perkins' Market Minute. Have a great weekend. I'm Meghan Grebner for Brownfield.